In the heart of ancient Mesoamerica, a deity walked among mortals. He was not a god of war, but a bringer of knowledge, art, and civilization. They called him Quetzalcoatl, the Feathered Serpent. He taught them to chart the stars, to cultivate the land, and to build cities of breathtaking beauty. Under his guidance, a golden age flourished. But this enlightened reign was not to last. Betrayed by a rival god, Quetzalcoatl was driven into exile, sailing east across the Great Sea. As he departed, he left behind a singular, earth-shattering promise. In a specific, foretold year, he would return from the east to reclaim his throne. For centuries, his people watched the horizon, waiting. They scanned the skies for omens, interpreting every tremor of the earth, holding their breath for the return of the God-King. But when the prophesied year arrived, what came from the sea was not what they expected, and the fulfillment of this prophecy would change their world forever. Before the empires, before the great pyramids rose to touch the clouds, there was the whisper of a god. An idea, potent and enduring, coiled in the consciousness of Mesoamerica's earliest civilizations. It was the fusion of opposites, a concept that defied simple explanation: the serpent and the bird. The serpent, bound to the earth, represented the soil, the water, the tangible world of human existence. The Quetzal, a bird of resplendent green and blue feathers, represented the heavens, the wind, the sky, and the freedom of the spirit. Together, they formed a single being of immense power, the Feathered Serpent. This was not merely a monster from mythology, it was a fundamental principle of the cosmos. The earliest known depictions, traced back to the ancient Olmec culture over 3,000 years ago, show a reptilian creature with avian features, a symbol of divine authority and creative force. This being embodied the sacred threshold between the sky and the earth, a conduit for spiritual energy. For the peoples of this land, the serpent's shedding of its skin was a powerful symbol of renewal, rebirth, and transformation. The bird's ability to soar symbolized a connection to the divine, a mastery over the elements. The feathered serpent was the bringer of life-giving rain, the breath of wind that moved the clouds, and the morning star that heralded the dawn. It was the deity credited with discovering corn, the very crop that sustained civilization, and with teaching humanity the arts of the calendar, medicine, and astronomy. This was a god of creation, not destruction, a deity of knowledge, not of ignorance. It was a complex, sophisticated idea that would be passed down through generations, evolving with each culture that embraced it. But it was more than an abstract symbol carved in stone. It was a living presence, a force whose influence would shape the destiny of millions. The echoes of this ancient serpent would ripple through time, waiting for the perfect place to build its temple, a city that would be known as the birthplace of the gods themselves. Long before the Aztecs dominated the Valley of Mexico, a colossal city rose from the earth, a metropolis so grand that later cultures believed it was built by giants or by the gods themselves. This was Teotihuacan, the city of the gods. At its peak, around 450 AD, it was one of the largest cities in the world, a marvel of urban planning and monumental architecture. Its heart was the Great Avenue of the Dead, a vast ceremonial road flanked by staggering structures, the immense Pyramid of the Sun and the elegant Pyramid of the Moon. But deep within the city's administrative and religious center, known as the Citadel, lay a monument of singular importance: the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Unlike the other great pyramids, this temple was not bare. Its facade was a breathtaking tapestry of stone, adorned with dozens of masterfully carved heads jutting out from its walls. They appeared in a deliberate, alternating pattern. First, the unmistakable image of the feathered serpent, with its undulating body and magnificent plumage. Beside it, a different being, a goggle-eyed deity, often associated with storms, water, and warfare. This juxtaposition was no accident. It was a powerful statement of cosmic balance and political authority. The rulers of Teotihuacan were declaring their mastery over both creation and destruction, fertility and military might. The feathered serpent was no longer just a concept. It was a symbol of the state itself, a divine patron of the ruling elite. Archaeological investigations have revealed the temple's profound significance. Beneath its foundations, numerous individuals were interred as part of its consecration, their bodies accompanied by rich offerings. This suggests that the god's worship was tied to the very lifeblood of the city and its power structure. For centuries, Teotihuacan was the cultural and spiritual center of Mesoamerica, and its influence spread for hundreds of miles. Yet, around the year 550, this magnificent city began to decline, its central precincts burned, and its people eventually dispersed. The metropolis fell into ruin, but the idea it had championed did not. The spirit of the feathered serpent would survive the fall of its greatest city, waiting to be reborn in a new form, not just as a god in the heavens, but as a man who would walk the earth. The fall of Teotihuacan left a power vacuum in central Mexico, a void filled by new peoples and new ideas. From this era of change emerged the Toltecs, a culture that would build upon the legacy of the past and give the feathered serpent its most famous identity. The story shifts from the abstract to the personal, focusing on a figure who straddles the line between history and myth. A priest-king born in the 10th century, named Quetzalcoatl. His name itself was prophetic, meaning, "One reed, our prince." Legend tells that he was a wise and benevolent ruler, a devout follower of the ancient deity of creation and knowledge. His devotion was so profound that his own identity began to merge with that of his patron god. He became known as Quetzalcoatl. He was not just a king who worshipped the feathered serpent. In the eyes of his people, he was its living incarnation on earth. As ruler, he sought to create a new kind of society. He was a patron of the arts, a master of science, and a spiritual guide who championed a philosophy of peace and intellectual pursuit. Most dramatically, the legends claim he opposed the widespread practice of human sacrifice, which was central to the religion of many of his contemporaries. He argued that the gods did not desire human life, but preferred more symbolic offerings: jade, incense, butterflies, and flowers. This was a radical, almost revolutionary theological stance. It placed him in direct opposition to the powerful, traditional factions of the Toltec elite, the warrior classes, and the priests of older, more demanding gods. They saw his reforms as a threat to the cosmic order and, more importantly, to their own power. His court became a battleground of ideas, a struggle between a vision of enlightenment and the entrenched traditions of ritual offering and military expansion. The man who had become a god now found himself profoundly human, facing political intrigue and the resentment of those who clung to the old ways. His reign, built on a foundation of peace and knowledge, was about to be challenged by a rival force, a shadow that represented everything he stood against. Under the guidance of its priest-king, Quetzalcoatl, the Toltec capital of Tallin, or Tula, became a city of legend. It was remembered by later cultures, especially the Aztecs, as a lost paradise, a golden age of perfection and prosperity. The stories paint a picture of a city where wonders were commonplace. The very buildings were said to be crafted from precious materials, with palaces made of jade, turquoise, and shimmering seashells. In the fields, corn grew in such abundance that a single ear was a load for one man. Cotton, it was said, grew naturally in vibrant colors of red, yellow, blue, and green, eliminating the need for dyes. Tallinn was a city of unparalleled craftsmanship. Its artisans were masters of metallurgy, featherwork, and pottery. their skills believed to be a direct gift from Quetzalcoatl himself. He was the great teacher, the one who imparted to the Toltecs the secrets of astronomy, allowing them to chart the heavens with stunning accuracy. He taught them the calendar, the art of writing, and the philosophies that valued creativity and intellectual discovery. This was the material manifestation of his spiritual vision, a society where prosperity flowed from knowledge and artistic expression, not from conquest and tribute. At the heart of Tallin's sacred precinct stood the temple pyramid dedicated to the morning star, guarded by colossal stone warriors. These famous Atlantean figures, standing nearly 15 feet tall, were not portraits of aggression, but of stoic duty. They were the eternal guardians of Quetzalcoatl's house of learning and light. For a time, Tallin was the center of the known world, a beacon of civilization whose influence was felt across Mexico. But such a perfect kingdom could not exist in isolation. Its wealth and its unorthodox philosophy attracted envy and ideological opposition. The peaceful order established by the Feathered Serpent was seen as a challenge by those who believed that the cosmos was fueled by a darker energy, a force that demanded appeasement through conflict and sacrifice. A shadow was creeping towards this kingdom of light, bringing with it a challenge that would not only threaten Tallin's existence, but would also test the soul of the man-god who ruled it. Every light casts a shadow, and the brilliant light of Quetzalcoatl had its cosmic opposite. His rival was a formidable and cunning deity named Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror. Where Quetzalcoatl represented creation, light, and order, Tezcatlipoca embodied the night, destiny, change, and conflict. He was a god of sorcerers and warriors, a trickster who could see into the hearts of both gods and men through his polished obsidian mirror. The legends tell of a great ideological struggle between these two forces for control of the Toltec destiny. Tezcatlipoca, a master of disguise, arrived in Tallin to orchestrate the downfall of the priest-king. He understood that Quetzalcoatl's greatest strength, his purity and wisdom, was also his greatest vulnerability. In one famous account, Tezcatlipoca presented himself as an old man and offered Quetzalcoatl a gift, a mirror. When the king looked into its dark reflective surface, he did not see a god, but an aging, wrinkled man. For the first time, he was filled with vanity and fear of his own mortality. Seeing this weakness, the trickster god then offered him a potent, fermented drink, promising it would restore his youth and vigor. The ascetic Quetzalcoatl, clouded by doubt, drank deeply. The beverage overwhelmed him, causing him to break his sacred vows of celibacy and sobriety in a night of public disgrace. When the morning came, so did the crushing weight of his shame. He had betrayed his own principles and failed his people. His moral authority was shattered. In the wake of his personal fall, Tallin itself began to suffer. Strange and unfortunate omens appeared, and the harmony of the kingdom dissolved into discord. The Golden Age was over. Overcome with remorse, Quetzalcoatl knew he could no longer rule. He abdicated his throne and began a long journey of exile, traveling east toward the Great Sea. As he prepared to depart from the shores of the Gulf of Mexico, he made a final, fateful vow. He promised his followers that he was not leaving forever. One day, he would return from the east in a year that corresponded with his name, the year Teotihuacan. He would come back to reclaim his rightful throne and restore his kingdom. This promise would become a prophecy, etched into the memory of generations, waiting centuries for a fulfillment that would change their world forever. In the magnificent city of Tula, the heart of the Toltec civilization, Quetzalcoatl reigned as a priest-king of unparalleled wisdom and purity. He was the embodiment of light, knowledge, and artistic creation. He had taught his people how to cultivate maize, chart the stars, and build temples that touched the sky. Under his guidance, Tula flourished, a city of peace and enlightenment where sacrifice was forbidden and life was held sacred. But even a god could have a rival. From the shadows emerged Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, a trickster deity of night, conflict, and capricious fate. He was the antithesis of Quetzalcoatl, a force of chaos set against the king's order. Tezcatlipoca, consumed by jealousy, devised a plan to disgrace his luminous counterpart. He appeared before Quetzalcoatl disguised as an old man, offering a gift, a polished obsidian mirror. When the Feathered Serpent King gazed into its dark, reflective surface, he did not see his divine essence. Instead, he saw the face of a frail, aging man, a reflection of the human mortality he had long transcended. Doubt, for the first time, entered his heart. Seizing this moment of vulnerability, Tezcatlipoca offered another gift, a fermented drink from the maguey plant, promising it would soothe his worries and restore his youth. Quetzalcoatl, who had sworn vows of abstinence, was hesitant. But the trickster was persuasive. The king drank, and then he drank more. The intoxicating beverage clouded his divine mind, extinguishing the light of his wisdom. Under this influence, he was led to break his most sacred vows of celibacy, an act that shattered his spiritual purity. When the dawn came, so did the crushing weight of awareness. The benevolent king awoke not to enlightenment, but to a profound sense of shame and defilement. He had failed himself, and more importantly, he had failed his people. The harmony of Tula was broken by his transgression. He could no longer be their spiritual guide, their perfect ruler. Overwhelmed by remorse, he knew he could not remain. He had to leave, to cast himself into exile as penance for his fall from grace. The great priest king, the bringer of civilization, prepared to abandon the city he had built, his heart heavy with a sorrow that would echo through the ages. The departure of Quetzalcoatl from Tula was a somber procession. The sky wept a fine mist as the disgraced king, now a wanderer, turned his back on the golden age he had created. His followers pleaded with him to stay, but his resolve was unbreakable. His penance demanded a journey, a long and arduous path toward the rising sun. He traveled east, a solitary figure moving through the valleys and mountains of the land that had once revered him as its highest authority. But this was not merely a journey of shame, it was a journey of legacy. As he walked, the seeds of his knowledge fell on fertile ground. In the city of Cholula, he lingered for a time, instructing the people in the finer arts of masonry, pottery, and governance. Under his brief tutelage, Cholula rose to prominence, becoming a great religious center with a magnificent pyramid built in his honor, a testament to his enduring influence. His path was marked by acts of creation, not destruction. Where he stopped, he taught. He showed people how to better read the calendar, how to polish jade, and how to weave intricate patterns from cotton. He was a figure of profound contradiction, a king in exile who still possessed the power to build civilizations. His journey was a living chronicle of his teachings, a final gift to the peoples of Mesoamerica. He crossed dense jungles and arid plains, his destination always the same, the great Eastern Sea, the divine water. Finally, after a long and transformative pilgrimage, he reached the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. Here, the final act of his mortal drama would unfold. Accounts differ on what happened next. Some legends say he constructed a raft of woven serpents and sailed into the horizon, vowing to one day return. Others tell a more spectacular tale, that he adorned himself in his full divine regalia, with brilliant quetzal feathers and jade, and built a great funeral pyre. He then entered the flames, his body consumed in a blaze of glory. As the fire died, his heart ascended into the heavens, transforming into the brilliant morning star, a celestial beacon forever heralding the dawn. Whether by sea or by fire, the message was the same. Quetzalcoatl was gone, but his presence lingered, a star in the sky and a promise whispered on the wind. Quetzalcoatl's departure left a vacuum in the spiritual landscape of Mesoamerica, but it also left behind a powerful and enduring idea, the prophecy of his return. This was not a vague hope, but a specific and deeply ingrained belief that would shape the destiny of future empires. The legends were clear. He had traveled east, across the divine water, and from the east, he would one day come back to reclaim his rightful throne and usher in a new era. The prophecy was tied directly to the intricate and precise Mesoamerican calendar. The priests who kept the sacred counts declared that the feathered serpent would return in a year that bore his name, Teotihuacan, or one reed. This specific year occurred only once every 52 years, the length of a full calendar cycle. The alignment of the man, the god, and the calendar date created a prophecy of immense power and specificity. For the civilizations that followed the Toltecs, especially the mighty Aztecs, this prophecy became a cornerstone of their worldview. It was taught to children, recited in poems, and debated by priests and nobles. The idea of a returning god-king was a source of both comfort and anxiety. On one hand, his return promised a golden age, a restoration of the idyllic peace of Tula. On the other, the return of a rightful king could mean a great upheaval, a reckoning for the current rulers, and the challenging of the established order. The Aztecs, who had built their empire through military might and a demanding religion, were particularly mindful of this. Quetzalcoatl represented a different way, a path of learning and artistry that stood in contrast to their own warrior ethos. His potential return was therefore a politically charged and spiritually significant event. As the 52-year cycles turned, every new one-reed year was met with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The rulers of the Aztec Empire would look to the eastern horizon, watching for any sign, any omen that might herald the arrival of the pale-skinned, bearded god who had sailed away so long ago. The prophecy was more than a myth. It was a political reality waiting to happen, a cultural time bomb ticking at the heart of the most powerful empire in the Americas. Long after Quetzalcoatl's departure, a new power rose from the swamps of Lake Texcoco. They called themselves the Mexica, though history would know them as the Aztecs. Through relentless ambition, political cunning, and formidable military strength, they forged a vast empire that stretched from the Gulf Coast to the Pacific Ocean. Their capital was the magnificent city of Tenochtitlan, an architectural marvel built on an island in the lake. Great causeways connected it to the mainland, and a network of canals served as its bustling streets. At its heart stood the Templo Mayor, a colossal twin pyramid dedicated to the god of war, Huitzilopochtli, and the god of rain, Tlaloc. This was the sacred center of their universe, a place of grand ceremony and ritual that they believed kept the cosmos in balance. Aztec society was highly stratified and deeply religious. At the top was the emperor, the Huitzilopochtli, revered as a near-divine figure. Below him were the nobles, priests, and the elite warrior classes, like the fearsome eagle and jaguar knights, who were the instruments of imperial expansion. The empire's prosperity was fueled by tribute, a constant flow of goods, food, and precious materials demanded from the hundreds of conquered city-states under its control. This system brought immense wealth to Tenochtitlan, but also fostered deep resentment among its subject peoples. The Aztec worldview was cyclical and fatalistic. They believed the universe had been created and destroyed 4 times before, and that they were living in the age of the 5th sun. They believed this sun was kept alive by a divine energy found in life itself, which had to be offered to the gods to prevent the world from falling into another era of cataclysm. This belief system drove their imperial expansion and the large-scale rituals for which they became known. Life in Tenochtitlan was a vibrant tapestry of commerce, art, and ceremony. But beneath the surface of this powerful and sophisticated civilization lay a constant, gnawing anxiety. The empire was held together by force, surrounded by resentful vassals. And in the minds of its priests and rulers, the ancient prophecy of the returning god from the east remained, a dormant but powerful variable in their cosmic equation. In the year 1502, a new emperor ascended to the Aztec throne, Moctezuma Xocoyotzin, known to history as Moctezuma II. He was not a weak or indecisive ruler, as he is sometimes portrayed. He was a seasoned military commander, a shrewd politician, and a deeply devout man who had been trained as a high priest before becoming emperor. He ruled over an empire at the apex of its power and influence. Yet, for all his authority, Moctezuma was a man troubled by the cosmos. He was a scholar of his people's history and religion, acutely aware of the ancient prophecies, especially the one concerning Quetzalcoatl. The fated one-reed year was approaching within his lifetime, and a series of strange and inexplicable events began to plague the capital, unsettling the emperor's spirit. The signs began a decade before the arrival of any foreigners. A brilliant streak of light, like a flaming ear of corn, appeared in the eastern sky and remained for a full year, causing widespread unease. Then, the temple of the war god Huitzilopochtli spontaneously burst into flames, its wooden structure consumed by a fire that water could not quench. Another temple was struck by lightning on a day with no storm. The waters of Lake Texcoco began to boil and foam without wind, flooding parts of the city. Fishermen brought Moctezuma a strange bird with a mirror on its head, and in it the emperor saw visions of armed men riding on the backs of large deer-like creatures. At night, a mournful female voice was heard weeping through the streets of Tenochtitlan, crying out for her lost children. For Moctezuma, a man steeped in religious doctrine, these were not random occurrences. They were omens, divine messages foretelling a great and terrible change. He summoned his wisest soothsayers and magicians, demanding an explanation, but their interpretations were vague and unsatisfying, filling him with frustration and dread. The portents all pointed east, the direction from which Quetzalcoatl was prophesied to return. Moctezuma's burden was immense. He was the guardian of the fifth sun, the steward of an empire, yet he felt powerless against the celestial signs. He waited, caught between his duty as an emperor and his belief in a fate written in the stars, staring anxiously at the eastern horizon for the arrival of the god who had promised to return. In the great city of Tenochtitlan, a disquieting mood had settled over the canals and pyramids. The Aztec Empire was at the zenith of its power, yet its ruler, Moctezuma II, was a man besieged by shadows. His nights were filled with troubled dreams, and his days were spent searching the skies for answers that he dreaded to find. The universe, it seemed, was beginning to unravel. For nearly a decade, a series of inexplicable events had plagued the capital, each one a chilling verse in a song of impending doom. Priests and commoners alike spoke of them in hushed tones. First, a tongue of fire had appeared in the eastern sky, a blazing pyramid that bled light across the heavens for a full year, causing widespread panic. Then, without cause, the temple of Huitzilopochtli, the patron god of war, spontaneously burst into flames. The inferno raged with such unnatural fury that water thrown upon it seemed only to fuel its hunger. Not long after, a second temple was struck by a bolt of lightning from a cloudless sky, a silent, powerful blow that shattered its straw roof. The omens were not confined to the heavens. The waters of Lake Texcoco, usually placid and life-giving, had boiled and surged, flooding a portion of the city and destroying homes. Fishermen reported catching a strange ash-colored bird with a mirror-like crest on its head. When they brought it to Moctezuma, he peered into the mirror and saw a vision of stars, followed by a terrifying image of armed men riding on the backs of enormous deer, advancing as a wave of destruction. Perhaps the most sorrowful omen was the voice of a weeping woman heard in the night, crying out for her lost children, a lament that echoed through the empty streets. Moctezuma, a deeply religious and learned man, grew increasingly desperate. He summoned his wisest soothsayers and magicians, demanding explanations. Their interpretations were vague and unsettling, speaking of change, upheaval, and the arrival of unknown forces. Their failure to provide clear answers only deepened the emperor's paranoia. He felt trapped by a fate that was written in the stars and whispered on the wind. Every strange cloud formation, every unusual animal sighting, was a message he could not fully decipher. The prophecies of the past, particularly the one concerning the return of the exiled god, Quetzalcoatl, began to loom large in his mind. The feathered serpent had promised to return from the east, and the omens seemed to herald a monumental arrival. The question that haunted the emperor was not if someone was coming, but who. Time in the Aztec world was not a straight line, but a repeating circle of immense complexity and sacred power. Their calendar was a fusion of two cycles, a 365-day solar year and a 260-day ritual calendar. Together, they created a 52-year cycle, a century at the end of which the world held its breath, waiting to see if the sun would rise again. Each year within this cycle had a name, a combination of a number from 1 to 13 and one of 20-day signs. And as the omens intensified their celestial warnings, the calendar priests noted with growing trepidation that the calendar was turning toward a year of profound and terrifying significance. Teotihuacan, the year 1 read. This was not just any year. According to the most sacred and ancient prophecies, 1 read was the year of Quetzalcoatl's birth. More importantly, it was the very year he had vowed he would return from his long exile in the east to reclaim his throne. As the final days of the old year passed, a palpable tension gripped the empire. The year 1 read, corresponding to 1519 in the European calendar, had arrived. For Moctezuma, the convergence of the omens with this prophesied date was almost too much to bear. The cosmic coincidence was precise, elegant, and horrifying. He felt himself to be an actor in a divine drama written ages ago, his every move preordained. His actions became those of a man trying to placate an unavoidable destiny. He ordered an increase in religious ceremonies, hoping to appease the gods and demonstrate his piety. He consulted his most trusted advisors, but they were as divided as his own mind. Some counseled a show of strength against any newcomers, arguing that the omens were warnings, not invitations. Others, more fearful of divine retribution, urged caution and respect, lest they offend a returning deity. The emperor vacillated between these two poles of action, his indecision a symptom of the empire's own deep-seated anxiety. He sent watchers to the eastern coasts, scouts who were ordered to report any unusual sightings along the Gulf of Mexico. They were to travel with the speed of the wind, bringing back drawings and detailed accounts of anything that deviated from the ordinary. The empire waited. The markets of Tenochtitlan still bustled with activity. The farmers still tended their floating gardens. But beneath the surface of daily life, the prophecy was a constant, unspoken presence. Everyone knew the significance of the year 1 read. They were living on the edge of history, waiting for a myth to walk out of the sea. Then, one day, a runner arrived at the palace, his lungs burning, his feet bruised from the long journey. He carried not just a message, but a revelation that would shatter the foundations of their world. The news that reached Moctezuma was beyond anything the Aztec imagination could have conceived. His coastal sentinels reported seeing impossible structures on the horizon of the Great Eastern Sea. They were not boats as the Aztecs knew them, not canoes carved from a single log. The messengers described them as floating towers or mountains, their sides gleaming in the sun, with great white cloths that billowed like clouds to catch the wind. From these floating hills came smaller boats, carrying men of a kind never before seen. Their skin was pale, as if they had been shielded from the sun their entire lives. Many had hair on their faces, thick and bushy, and hair on their heads the color of sunlight. They were encased in glittering metal that shone with a blinding light, and they carried strange sticks that could speak with the voice of thunder, spitting fire and smoke. The reports, accompanied by detailed drawings on agave paper, sent a shockwave through the emperor's court. Moctezuma studied the images intently: the pale skin, the beards, the arrival from the east. It all aligned with the ancient descriptions of the god Quetzalcoatl. The timing was perfect, falling exactly in the year 1 read. Yet, there were troubling details. These beings were accompanied by strange, powerful beasts the size of large deer, which they rode upon as if they were extensions of their own bodies. The thundersticks they carried could fell a tree from a great distance, a display of power that was both awesome and terrifying. Moctezuma was paralyzed by a profound dilemma. Was this the glorious return of a benevolent god, or was it the arrival of something far more sinister, cloaked in the guise of prophecy? To treat a god as a man would be an unforgivable blasphemy, inviting divine wrath upon his entire empire. But to treat a man as a god would be a catastrophic political mistake, a surrender of his own divine authority. He convened his council, a tense gathering of priests, warriors, and nobles. The debate was fierce. The Teotihuacan, his second-in-command, argued for a swift, decisive military response. He saw these newcomers not as gods, but as invaders, a threat to be eliminated before they could reach the capital. Others, swayed by the weight of prophecy and the power displayed by the strangers, urged a course of cautious diplomacy and reverence. The emperor, torn between faith and reason, fear and duty, ultimately chose a middle path. He would not attack them, but he would not invite them either. He decided to send a delegation bearing gifts of unparalleled magnificence, treasures fit for a deity. It would be both an offering of welcome and a test. The nature of their reaction to these sacred gifts, he believed, would reveal their true identity. He dispatched his most trusted ambassadors to the coast, their canoes laden with the finest works of his empire. Their mission: to greet the strangers, to honor them, and to uncover the truth behind the towers on the water. On the hot sands of the Veracruz coast, two worlds collided. The Aztec delegation, led by nobles in brilliant feather cloaks, approached the camp of the strangers with solemn ceremony. They presented the gifts from their emperor, a treasure trove designed to overwhelm and impress. They laid out discs of solid gold and silver, as large as cartwheels, representing the sun and the moon. They offered headdresses of iridescent quetzal feathers, jade jewelry, and intricately woven textiles. Most significantly, they brought ceremonial vestments associated directly with the gods, including a turquoise mask and serpent-headed ornaments belonging to Quetzalcoatl himself. They were, in effect, offering the stranger his own divine garments. The leader of the Pale Men, Hernán Cortés, received the treasures with a calculated grace. A man of immense ambition and cunning, he quickly grasped the power of the myth he had stumbled into. While his men saw only immense material wealth, Cortés saw a path to conquest paved with prophecy. He understood that the Aztecs were not just giving him gold, they were asking him a question. Are you the one we have been waiting for? Communication was made possible by a remarkable linguistic chain. Cortés spoke to Geronimo de Aguilar, a Spaniard who had been shipwrecked for years and spoke the local Mayan language. Aguilar then translated the Spanish into Mayan for a gifted native woman named Malintzin, who had been given to the Spanish. She, in turn, translated the Mayan into Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs. Through this fragile bridge of words, Cortés began to weave his narrative. He spoke of his own great king from across the sea, a powerful ruler who had sent him as an emissary. He used ambiguous language, never explicitly claiming to be Quetzalcoatl, but allowing the Aztecs to draw their own conclusions. To reinforce his mystique, he staged a demonstration of his power. He had his cavalry charge along the beach, the horses, animals unknown in the Americas, thundering across the sand, their riders seeming like gods of war. Then he ordered his cannons to be fired. The deafening roar and the sight of cannonballs shattering trees in the distance left the Aztec ambassadors stunned and terrified. They saw not technology, but divine magic, the control of thunder and lightning itself. The encounter was fraught with cultural misinterpretations. The Aztecs offered the Spaniards food, sprinkled with a substance they considered sacred, which the Spanish, fearing it was harmful, refused. This rejection was seen as a sign of their otherworldly nature. The ambassadors dutifully recorded everything in painted codices: the ships, the weapons, the horses, the men. When they returned to Tenochtitlan, their report only confirmed Moctezuma's deepest anxieties. The strangers possessed unimaginable power, and their leader seemed to embrace the divine honors offered to him. And now they were asking for permission to travel to the capital to meet the emperor in person. The path to Tenochtitlan was not a simple one. As Hernán Cortés and his small army of conquistadors marched inland, they moved through a landscape of shifting allegiances. They quickly discovered that the Aztec Empire, for all its power, was not a monolith. It was a mosaic of conquered city-states, many of which chafed under Moctezuma's rule and the heavy tribute demanded by the capital. In the city of Tlaxcala, the Spaniards encountered fierce resistance. The Tlaxcalans were the traditional enemies of the Aztecs and fought the invaders with ferocious bravery. Yet, after a series of hard-fought battles, the Spanish prevailed, their steel weapons, cannons, and cavalry proving decisive. In victory, Cortés showed not cruelty, but shrewd diplomacy. He offered the Tlaxcalans an alliance, a chance to join forces against their mutual enemy, Moctezuma. For the Tlaxcalans, these powerful newcomers represented the opportunity they had been waiting for. They agreed, and Cortés's small force was suddenly bolstered by thousands of elite native warriors. News of this alliance reached Tenochtitlan and filled the court with dread. Moctezuma's advisors, particularly his brother Cuitláhuac, begged him to see the truth. These were not gods. They were men, dangerous men, who were now leading an army of the empire's enemies. They urged the emperor to ambush the Spaniards, to destroy them before they could reach the city gates. But Moctezuma remained trapped in the web of prophecy. He had sent more gifts, more entreaties for the strangers to turn back, but they had refused. He saw their relentless advance not as human ambition, but as the unyielding pull of destiny. To resist, he feared, would be to fight fate itself, and so he made the most fateful decision of his reign. He would welcome them. On November 8, 1519, the Spanish conquistadors and their Tlaxcalan allies marched across the Great Causeway leading into Tenochtitlan. What they saw left them speechless. It was a city that seemed to rise from a dream, a vast metropolis of gleaming white pyramids and palaces built on an island in the middle of a lake, connected to the shore by engineering marvels. A magnificent procession came out to greet them. At its head, carried on a litter adorned with gold and brilliant feathers, was the emperor himself, Moctezuma II. The two leaders met. Cortés, the pragmatic adventurer from a minor noble family; Moctezuma, the semi-divine ruler of millions. Through his translators, the emperor spoke words that would echo through history, words of welcome that seemed to abdicate his throne. He spoke of the ancient prophecy, of the long-awaited return from the east, and acknowledged that Cortés must be the one they were waiting for. He welcomed the stranger into his city, his palace, his home. The prophecy was fulfilled. The feathered serpent had, in a manner of speaking, returned, and the gates of the Aztec Empire had just been opened to its own destruction. Within the heart of Tenochtitlan, an uneasy peace held sway. The Spaniards, led by Hernán Cortés, were honored guests in the palace of Quetzalcoatl, living amidst the splendor of the Aztec capital. Emperor Moctezuma II, a ruler revered as a near deity by his people, continued to treat the newcomers with a mixture of reverence and caution. He showered them with gifts of gold, intricate featherwork, and precious stones, hoping to satisfy their desires and perhaps encourage their departure. But the Spanish appetite for wealth was insatiable. Every gift only deepened their conviction that a legendary treasure lay somewhere within the city's walls. The facade of diplomacy began to crack under the weight of Spanish ambition. In a move of unparalleled audacity, Cortés placed Moctezuma under house arrest within his own palace. The god-king of the Mexica was now a prisoner, a puppet through whom Cortés could command the empire. The flow of gold became a torrent, as temples and storehouses were emptied to meet the Spaniards' demands. Sacred objects, crafted over generations, were melted down into crude bars of bullion. For the Aztec nobility and priesthood, this was the ultimate sacrilege. Their leader was captive, their holy places were being desecrated, and the strangers they had welcomed were revealing themselves not as gods, but as avaricious men. The breaking point arrived when Cortés was forced to leave the city to confront a rival Spanish force on the coast, leaving his trusted but volatile captain, Pedro de Alvarado, in command. During Cortés's absence, the Aztecs prepared for the great festival of Teotihuacan, a major ceremony in their religious calendar. They received permission from Alvarado to proceed. Thousands of the city's elite, its finest warriors and nobles, gathered unarmed in the courtyard of the great temple. They danced and sang, their bodies adorned with feathers and jewels, in a ritual of deep spiritual significance. Alvarado, fearing an uprising, or simply seeing an opportunity to strike at the heart of the Aztec leadership, made a fateful decision. He ordered his soldiers to seal the exits of the courtyard. The festival of renewal became a scene of profound betrayal. The trust that had been so fragile was irrevocably shattered. When news of the event spread through the city, the simmering resentment of the populace erupted into a furious, unstoppable rage. The Spanish garrison, with Alvarado at its head, found themselves trapped, besieged in their palace by a city that now thirsted for retribution. The mask of Quetzalcoatl had not just fallen, it had been torn away, revealing the face of a conqueror. Hernán Cortés returned to Tenochtitlan to find a city transformed. The air, once filled with the sounds of markets and ceremony, now echoed with war cries. His captain, Pedro de Alvarado, and the Spanish garrison were barricaded, surrounded by a population united in fury. Cortés fought his way into the palace, but his arrival only sealed the trap. The Spaniards were now entirely encircled, cut off from food, water, and any hope of escape. In a desperate attempt to quell the uprising, Cortés compelled Moctezuma to speak to his people from a palace rooftop. But the emperor's authority was gone. He was seen as a traitor, a mouthpiece for the invaders. He was met not with obedience, but with a volley of stones and arrows. The emperor's subsequent demise marked the point of no return. Open war had been declared. With their situation untenable, the Spanish planned a desperate nighttime escape. On June 30th, 1520, under the cover of rain and darkness, they attempted to slip out of the city across the Tacuba Causeway. This retreat would become known as the Noche Triste, the sad night. Laden with gold looted from the treasury, the soldiers and their Tlaxcalan allies were slow and vulnerable. Aztec warriors, alerted to the escape, swarmed them from all sides, attacking from canoes on the lake and from the causeway itself. The narrow escape route became a scene of chaos. Hundreds of Spaniards and thousands of their allies were lost in the fighting or dragged from the causeway into the dark waters of Lake Texcoco. Cortés, who managed to reach the mainland, reportedly wept at the sight of his catastrophic losses. Beaten but not broken, he led the battered remnants of his army on a grueling retreat to the safety of allied Tlaxcala. It was here that the true measure of his resolve was revealed. Instead of admitting defeat, Cortés began meticulously planning his revenge. He understood that Tenochtitlan's greatest strength, its position on an island, was also its greatest weakness. He commissioned the construction of 13 brigantines, small but powerful warships, to be built in sections by the Tlaxcalans. In an incredible feat of logistics, the finished pieces were carried over the mountains by thousands of porters and reassembled on the shores of Lake Texcoco. In the spring of 1521, the fleet was launched. These vessels, armed with cannons, gave the Spanish naval supremacy, allowing them to blockade the city and support their ground assaults. The stage was set for the final act, the siege of the magnificent island capital. The siege of Tenochtitlan began in May 1521. It was not a single battle, but a slow, grinding campaign of attrition that lasted for nearly 3 months. The city, now led by the young and fiercely determined Emperor Cuauhtémoc, Moctezuma's successor, prepared for a desperate defense. The Spanish forces, bolstered by tens of thousands of indigenous allies from Tlaxcala and other rival city-states, advanced along the 3 main causeways that connected the island to the mainland. Their new brigantines controlled the lake, cutting off the city's primary route for food and supplies. The Aztecs, in turn, fought with ferocious courage, launching counterattacks in war canoes and fiercely contesting every foot of the causeways. Cortés's strategy was methodical and relentless. He severed the aqueducts that brought fresh water from the mainland, forcing the inhabitants to rely on brackish wells. As his forces pushed deeper into the city, they systematically demolished buildings, using the rubble to fill in the canals. This created solid ground for their cavalry and cannons, but it also meant the deliberate destruction of one of the world's most beautiful cities. Tenochtitlan was being unmade, stone by stone. The defenders, however, refused to yield. They adapted their tactics, setting traps for the Spanish horsemen and using the city's labyrinthine layout to their advantage. Yet, the most formidable weapon brought by the Europeans was one they could not control. An epidemic of smallpox, introduced to the continent by a member of a previous Spanish expedition, was now raging within the besieged city. With no natural immunity, the indigenous population was devastated. The disease swept through the crowded streets, incapacitating warriors, leaders, and civilians alike. It crippled the city's ability to resist far more effectively than any Spanish weapon. The defenders were now fighting on 3 fronts, against the invaders on the causeways, against starvation and thirst from the blockade, and against an invisible pestilence within their own homes. By August, the city was a ruin. The resistance was confined to a small corner of the Tlatelolco district. The defenders were exhausted and vastly outnumbered. On August 13, 1521, the final Spanish assault broke the last lines of defense. Cuauhtémoc, attempting to escape by canoe to continue the fight from elsewhere, was captured by a Spanish brigantine. With the capture of their emperor, the last vestige of Aztec resistance collapsed. After months of heroic defiance, the great city of Tenochtitlan fell silent. The world of the Aztecs had been turned to ash. From the smoking ruins of Tenochtitlan, a new world began to rise. Hernán Cortés, now the master of a fallen empire, envisioned a new capital for the Spanish crown, one that would stand as a permanent symbol of its authority. He made the strategic decision to build directly on top of the Aztec foundations. The new metropolis, named Mexico City, would literally be built from the stones of the old. The great pyramids and temples, which had once been the spiritual center of the Aztec cosmos, were systematically dismantled. Their carved stones, imbued with the sacred history of the Mexica, were repurposed to construct cathedrals, government palaces, and the homes of Spanish colonists. The central plaza, the Zocalo, was established over the ceremonial heart of Tenochtitlan. This act was both practical and deeply symbolic, a new order physically and ideologically supplanting the old. The serpent, the symbol of indigenous spirituality embodied by Quetzalcoatl, did not simply vanish. It was driven underground, where it began a complex process of fusion with the eagle of the Spanish Habsburg Empire. This cultural and religious syncretism became the defining feature of the new society. While the Spanish friars worked diligently to convert the native population to Catholicism, indigenous people found ways to preserve their ancestral beliefs. They embedded their old cosmology within the new religion. Hills that were once sacred to a particular Aztec deity became the sites of new churches dedicated to a Catholic saint. The lines blurred. Old gods wore new masks, and ancient rituals were given new names. The promise of Quetzalcoatl's return was reinterpreted, no longer as the arrival of a specific person, but perhaps as the eventual resurgence of a suppressed cultural identity. Nowhere is this blending more apparent than in the story of the Virgin of Guadalupe. In 1531, just a decade after the conquest, an indigenous man named Juan Diego reported seeing an apparition of a dark-skinned Virgin Mary on the hill of Tepeyac, a site that had formerly housed a temple to the Aztec mother goddess, Tonantzin. She spoke to him in his native Nahuatl language. The image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, with her distinctly indigenous features and rich celestial symbolism, quickly became the most powerful religious icon in Mexico. She was a figure who could be embraced by both the Spanish and the indigenous populations, a spiritual bridge between two worlds. She represented the birth of a new, uniquely Mexican identity, a fusion of the European and the Mesoamerican, a culture born from the complex legacy of both the serpent and the eagle. 5 centuries have passed since the fall of Tenochtitlan. The Spanish Empire is gone, and a vibrant, independent nation now stands in its place. Yet, through all the upheavals of history, the spirit of the feathered serpent has endured. Quetzalcoatl, the ancient god of creation, knowledge, and the wind, remains one of the most potent symbols in the cultural landscape of modern Mexico. His story, a complex tapestry of myth, prophecy, and historical tragedy, continues to resonate with profound meaning. He is far more than a figure from a distant past. He is a living presence in the nation's art, its politics, and its very identity. In the 20th century, artists of the Mexican muralism movement, such as Diego Rivera and José Clemente Orozco, resurrected Quetzalcoatl as a central figure in their grand historical narratives. On the walls of public buildings, they depicted him not as a vanquished deity, but as a foundational symbol of indigenous wisdom and creativity, a powerful counter-narrative to the colonial version of history. For them, Quetzalcoatl represented the glorious pre-Hispanic past that had been suppressed but never extinguished. This artistic revival helped cement the feathered serpent as an icon of national pride, a link to a unique heritage that predated European arrival by millennia. The prophecy of his return has also evolved. The tragic misidentification of Hernán Cortés as the returning god is now understood as a powerful metaphor for the colonial encounter, a story of misplaced trust and ultimate betrayal. But the promise of a return has been reclaimed and redefined. It is no longer seen as the literal reappearance of a deity from the East. Instead, it has come to symbolize the cultural and spiritual resurgence of indigenous peoples throughout the Americas. It represents the ongoing effort to reclaim languages, traditions, and philosophies that were systematically suppressed for centuries. The return is happening now, in the classrooms where native languages are taught, in the revival of ancient farming techniques, and in the political movements advocating for indigenous rights. Quetzalcoatl, the bringer of civilization, was a god who, according to myth, departed but promised to come back. Perhaps that promise was never about a single man or a specific date. Perhaps it was a prophecy of resilience. The culture he represented was battered, broken, and buried, but it was never destroyed. The spirit of the feathered serpent survives, in the patterns of a traditional textile, in the flavor of corn, in the rhythm of a folk dance, and in the enduring soul of the Mexican people. The feather still catches the wind, a timeless symbol of a culture that continues to create, to adapt, and to endure.